So could I ask you to just introduce yourselves first, please? Start with you, Dana.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm Dana Nightingale. I've been with Arkane since 2010. I started on the original Dishonored, and I spent most of my time here doing level design. I worked on the Clockwork Mansion, of course, but now on Deathloop, I'm the campaign designer. So I'm responsible for basically the player's critical path through the entire game. And prior to working at Arkane, I did a lot of modding. I made Thief mods for about 10 years while doing my architecture degree. I don't know how much more detail you want.
Yeah, are there any like Thief mods that people might recognize the name of?
I worked on something called Mission X and Gathering at the End and Fables of the Penitent Thief.
Okay, cool. Excellent. How about you, David?
I arrived in Arkane at 2014. And yeah, the Clockwork Mansion was my first mission in Arkane. And I worked before in another video game studio since 1999. So yes. And
Étrange Libellule?
Yeah, the first game studio was Étrange Libellule, yes. ELP Games at the end.
Excellent. Okay, so I'm going to swap over to the game now. And I guess before we even go in, I'd like to just sort of ask, how did this whole level come about? What was the ideation process, and how did it begin?
My first exposure to it was right after we had wrapped up. I had wrapped up my work on the Knife of Dunwall, and I was just shown a rather long list of all of the potential level ideas that the team was brainstorming to include in Dishonored 2. And one of them was the Mansion of a Clockwork Inventor. So I skimmed the list, and I look at the list thinking this is going to be super hard to decide. How am I going to know which one to pick? And I see that one and I'm like, yeah, that one. Oh, that's what I'm doing. No hesitation. So then I just started prototyping with just no concept of what the map would be in the end, other than just that single line, the Mansion of a Clockwork Inventor. And well, there was a little bit more. The idea was that the house should reflect the fact that he was building these clockwork soldiers, and they wanted that to be represented in the building. So immediately I made this really abstract, weird piece it was kind of like several U-shaped pieces with furniture on the different surfaces, so top, bottom, side, and they were just constantly in motion and moving past each other, and they would line up and pause and then keep going and then line up and pause again, and all these different configurations. And it was just like, I wanted to start with the most wacky potential idea behind this. And of course, everyone's like eyes got really big, but they're all like, well, this isn't a playable map. We still need to make a Dishonored map in the end. This is a fascinating sculpture. So I spent the next year or so kind of doing a back and forth, give and take between really ambitious ideas, not as wacky as that first prototype, or like on the other end of the spectrum, very restrained, a basic level, but with a couple of moving walls. And we tried to, we were not in the point where we were going to make a decision yet, but it was, let's take every possible version of this idea and do a mock-up of it to see, like, to take the temperature of each idea to see, how do we feel about this version? How do we feel about that version? And not just in terms of like what we thought was cool, but just in like the scope. What did this imply for the scope? How much work was this going to be? So no concept at all of what the layout would be, what the players' goals or like what the challenges would be. The only thing we knew for sure was there was going to be the inventor, Sokolov was going to play a role, and there were these clockwork soldiers. Other than that, it was just prototyping different moving rooms, different layouts. Oh, and a big emphasis from like day zero on the letting the player be inside the mechanisms. So from the earliest prototypes, it was always about this divide between the space for normal people and the space where the player could go in the guts of the building, which was very in line with kind of our the design philosophy from Dishonored, where there was always this threshold between where normal people can go and where a supernatural assassin can go. So like the little tunnels and the rooftops, and there was always kind of a sense of a behind the scenes, even from the earliest Dishonored map. But now we could take it a step even further with this.
Do you remember any of the other concepts on that list? Are there any that didn't get into any of the Dishonored games?
We were looking at. I only remember the others that I prototyped. It was quite a long list, but I did do a prototype for a redux of the Masquerade Ball concept, which we eventually decided to not do in Dishonored 2. Like, we didn't want to try to outboil Lady Boyle immediately, though we are now revisiting it for Deathloop. It's been in many of the trailers, the party with all the wolf masks. So, you can always come back. And another one that was actually supposed to be part of the Clockwork Mansion was the Wind Corridor. I don't know if you can picture Karnica in your head, but in the background, there was always these cliffs and like with this divide straight between them. And that was the Wind Corridor. And you were supposed to have to travel through that in order to get to Jindash's mansion, which was at the far side of that location. He lived way outside of the city. So it was this completely non-urban map with just cliffs and like factories. Yeah, that location was supposed to be filled with factories because they were using the wind power to drive all the mechanisms. So first you go through these crazy factories with all these mechanics built around the wind being strong enough to actually pick you up and blow you away.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And the far reach power was going to be really very critical to navigating it. Especially like letting yourself being blown away and then at the last moment grabbing on and pulling yourself back to a new location. But that really didn't make it very far. We moved away from that probably after about 6 or 7 months, just because the scope of the game was being nailed down and we realized we had too much. So we had to let go a few of the ideas, and that was one of them. So instead we traveled through a city district to get to the Clockwork Mansion.
Sure. So let's talk about this. This is the first transformation of the level with this introduction. What did you want to achieve with this moment here?
This was just to make the player like shit themselves, basically. Am I allowed to say that?
Sure.
Should I say that? Should I do another take?
Yeah, generally GMTK is a bit of a general audience. Let's get that another go.
The point of this part was to just, wow the player. On a more meta level, this was also us trying to not be completely overshadowed by the Blur trailer.
And so we also get our first look at a Clockwork Soldier. I'm curious, so we start the level in neutral territory. Jindosh is kind of allowing us to walk around the map for a little bit. What was your sort of reason for letting the player not immediately start in a hostile way?
That's something we went back and forth on so many times, and there were so many iterations of how to achieve that, because the initial idea is the clockwork is immediately hostile, but that's such an overwhelming thing to do to the player immediately. So what I wanted to do to to add, like, let the player focus on the drama of the moment, the like understanding the space and the situation, and giving them a chance to look at the Clockwork Soldier was to start it off as non-hostile. Because Jindosh doesn't know who you are yet. He hasn't done his goofy little analysis that he does of you. So the idea is, like, he built all of this stuff to impress guests because he wants to sell his work. He wants clients. So you bring in the Clockwork Soldier as part of this, moment that's supposed to make the guest's jaw drop, but it doesn't attack immediately. And of course, the trouble is that 80% of the players would just hide already. They would not want to engage with it. They would assume that it's hostile. So we actually decided to let that work. So if you do hide and the Clockwork Soldier doesn't see you, Jindosh will start to say, is anybody there? Hello, is anyone there? Because there's no confirmation that anyone happened. And finally, he's begrudgingly saying, must have been an error in the mechanism. And then you can continue through the map in that perfect stealth run that's possible, where you go through the whole map without ever alerting him. So we let the player, sometimes you have to see how players are actually reacting, and rather than just fighting against it, you have to just go with it and say, well, this is their natural reaction. What do we give them to validate this reaction?
So now we get to finally meet Kieran Jindosh. Was there any, I don't know how involved you were in terms of creating the character and stuff, but is there any sort of inspiration from maybe real life people or video game villains for Jindosh?
I wasn't part of the conceptualization of the Jindosh character. That mostly happened on between creative direction, narrative design, level art direction. We just kind of and of course art direction. His little mechanical thumb was a very strong piece that they wanted to show his character. But no, I wasn't involved with that at all. I had my own ideas about who Jindosh was and what his deal was, but I mostly just followed their lead, focused on the level design, tried to give those folks as best as I could do to give them what they wanted and what they were hoping for the character. Well, this scene where you're speaking to him was something we wanted to do more of after Dishonored 1, where the player would sometimes just see the antagonist of the level very briefly, or sometimes they would be dead before you even realized that you had met them. So we looked for many opportunities in Dishonored 2 to let the player meet the antagonists early in a context where you couldn't necessarily engage with them. So we could do more with presenting their character rather than have it simply be, you hear other characters talking about them or you're reading them, and then the next thing you know, they're dead.
So the other thing about Jindosh is that he's sort of taunting you and talking to you in the map a lot, similar to things like maybe Showdown in System Shock. Was that sort of any inspiration there?
Oh, 1000%. It was that's just the way I talked about it the entire time. It was Jindosh's Showdown lines. Absolutely.
Excellent. And so did the I'm getting chased by this Clockwork Soldier. Did the design of Jindosh, or his sort of characterization, influence the way that the level was designed?
Yes. Well, it really, the reason the whole level exists is because it came from step one is we want non-human enemies in the game, so players have more opportunity to use their tools without having to worry about engaging with the chaos system. So now you can let loose on these mechanical creatures. Okay, then who created them? Okay, so if this person created them, they must be part of this, they must be part of the ruling class in this area. Well, then maybe you should go visit them. Maybe they should be one of your key targets. Okay, and it goes on from there. But as for the mansion itself, it became about this, Jindosh is very showy and he's very he's practical, and he's kind of a capitalist. He wants to sell his work. He's in it for the money. So he has this very opulent place. He wants people to come to him to be awed by his creations and then buy them. So like the whole setup of the house, all this extremely extravagant nonsense, he has it in his personal areas as well. He actually uses it. It's not totally for show, but it's all about like just stunning his potential customers with his brilliance. So they'll buy some Clockwork Mansion, some Clockwork Soldiers, which we eventually got to revisit in Death of the Outsider, where we actually showed that someone had bought some of the Clockwork Soldiers, and you see them in the bank.
The Clockwork Soldiers, could you talk a bit about how they kind of work as enemies compared to the human enemies, and what you want to achieve with those?
That wasn't something I was involved in a lot. I kind of just interpreted what I was given and gave feedback when I could. One of the things that was kind of that was a result of seeing how they actually worked in the map was the decision to make there be two types, because they were just such a difficult enemy. So there's the deluxe edition with the 4 arms and the eyes on the back, and then there's the standard version. And the decision to branch them off into 2 different versions just came from seeing how just there was no difficulty gradient in the map. Immediately, you were super overwhelmed by this insurmountable enemy. You could see behind it, could attack in all directions. So I gave a ton of feedback to the teams in charge of that to say I would really like something a bit easier, so I can create a few encounters early on that are a bit less intimidating, get the player used to fighting them. So this one, for example, is the simpler version. The first one you see that you don't have to fight, that's the super dangerous one. When Jindosh sicks the 2 on you in the gallery, those are the simpler ones.
Absolutely. So in this section, we get a nice bit where these characters are kind of talking about how the Clockwork Soldier works. And we also get some notes on the wall that give you some tips as well on Inspired. So what sort of techniques are you using to kind of teach the player concepts that are going to be useful to them?
Well, we have to consider that some players are going to go very slowly and be very observant, and they're going to read every bit of information. And we want them to feel like that caution is rewarded. So we will place information that will give them an advantage along the way, so that they can like listen to the conversation, read the note, and now they understand better what their approach is. But the other player who just wants to like skip all that and dig right in and just engage immediately with the systems, they're going to learn by doing. So they will have the encounter. Like the actual mechanics will also teach the player how to play. So the Clockwork Soldiers animations will give them different cues, the audio cues from the way it's behaving. So both players wind up with the same information, but they both got it in a way that was more in line with how they want to play.
This part, I feel like so far in the level, it's been kind of quite straightforward where you're supposed to go. Jindosh is telling you to go places, the waypoints tell you to go places. We get to a point here where there's an elevator, but there's an arc pylon on the way, it's going to kill us. And now we've got to make decisions. We can go to the right, we can go to the left. Was it kind of intentional that this is the point where the game kind of let go of your hand and asks you to start exploring?
Yes, that's basically it. In fact, there's if you had found the route behind the walls, you might actually be entering from this direction. But in that case, you have a very different perception of what challengers are going to be ahead. But yeah, like exactly as you described, this is really the moment where the level now starts to open up, and it's really driven by your own curiosity and your own observations. Like what you notice then completely dictates what your goals are now. Like if you just see the elevator, then now it's a vignette about getting past the arc pylon and getting to the elevator. But maybe you notice that one of the gratings that you can see straight ahead of you, there's that grating above the passageway. But there's a hole in that in one of the panels. Yep, there it is. So maybe that's the thing you notice. And now your goal is, I want to get through there. Or maybe you've already realized that those windows are all openable and you can get behind the scenes. So you could go through this space and look for what's the next window I can get through. So it's really just about what you've noticed at this point and like going at your own pace. Maybe you're really experienced with our mechanics and you know that the arc pylon is always going to be powered by a whale oil battery, and it's always going to have a hack panel to change its faction. So then your goal might be, well, I want to engage with that system, so I don't care about all these other routes. I want to find the way to turn that arc pylon to my side. Or maybe you notice that the guard pulled the lever to make the arc pylon flip over. So now it's in the room. So your goal could be, I want to get to that lever to revert the room back into the like it had the piano and the harp. Mm-hmm. So it's the only place where you're fully blocked here is if you're just not taking in anything. So the game really forces you to look around and notice all of these different things and form your own plan. And it's not going to tell you which plan is best.
So obviously getting behind the walls and behind the contraption is an amazing feeling, especially when you kind of like do something like this and like slip in between as it's moving.
Yeah.
I mean, I imagine that must have been a bit of a nightmare for programming and everything to get this to work.
Oh, yes.
What were the sort of discussions with that?
The entire suite of tools to make any of this possible was all coded up as I was building the map. So when we started, I was doing all of these prototypes in Unreal because that had the matinee system. So you could build this kind of stuff pretty easily. So I was doing prototypes in Unreal for probably over a year, and I've got a lot of those videos of those that I can show you. Our editors called Void Studio. Void Studio didn't have any tools for animating statics. So I had no way to actually make any of this move. So it was all done with teleports. So I only had you pulled the lever and it could only toggle between the two versions. So everything that was possible while it was in motion just had to stay in my head for like a year and a half at least. But it was always imagined that way because all the prototypes were built around the idea that it's not only about the two configurations, it's about all the possibilities that happen during the transition. That's why they all happen so slowly.
Fight some bad guys. So what sort of considerations in terms of like where do you place the enemies and where's the best place for the fights to be?
That was really tricky in this case because we at one point it was really only the Clockwork Soldiers. I think I mentioned before that we had a difficulty issue. So as development went on, we realized that we needed more and more human enemies just to provide more of a variety of encounters. It still needed to feel like a Dishonored mission in the end, but I always wanted to keep it very light. I never wanted there to be more than 3 enemies in one place at a time, because this map isn't about the big combat encounters, and the spaces don't really permit it. None of the areas are big enough to allow that, and the ones that are big enough to allow that are so detailed and complex, we would start to run into performance issues. Our AI are very expensive on the CPU, so we can only have so many at a time. So it became about having very simple and like tweaked to the finest detail little encounters with 2 and 3 enemies. They were always doing something very specific and always designed so that you could completely avoid them if you need to, which is naturally how all of the Dishonored maps are designed. But I had so little space to work with in these, a lot of these like rooms are so much tighter. I had to have really like specific control over where they were looking, where they were going. Yeah, so it was, you know, you see any one of these little enemy encounters, and it's going to be something like the 8th version of it. And a lot of it was just trying things to see how it felt, like playing it over and over. This doesn't feel quite right. I like the like sneaking through here wasn't, it didn't feel good because it felt kind of random. It was too much trial and error. I need to be able to anticipate where they're going. So the player who's very attentive and very patient should be able to pull it off on the first try. We don't want you to ever feel like you failed because the game is just being random. So their movement have to be very deliberate, very predictable. And that's really, really hard to achieve. The animations help a lot because they start doing a certain thing and you think, okay, they're going to be doing that for at least 10 seconds now. So this is my chance to get behind them. Yeah, but it's very, very challenging. And the main ingredient was just being willing to throw it away and start over if it just didn't feel right.
I wanted to ask about this this head here. Is this from the like early trailer of Dishonored 2 where they first showed the Clockwork Soldiers?
Yes, actually, for a long time, that's how they looked like. That's how they looked in the game. Feedback was that they weren't intimidating enough.
Really?
So we did another path. We doubled their height, I think. David, can you remember how small they were originally?
Oh, I think that there are two. They have the same size at the beginning, but they have a very big head in the back, and this cutted the head in front.
I do think I know they made them a meter taller because we had to change a lot of the art in the map because suddenly they were so much bigger.
Maybe, yes.
Yeah,
sure.
But
maybe
they changed it to the bird head. They got originally they looked exactly like they did in the trailer. That was like, I think literally the gameplay model was the one in the trailer. But you get feedback from all sorts of sources, and when they start to line up, you start to see a trend, which is the Clockwork Soldiers look goofy. So you change it. But thankfully, we got a second chance with those heads again in Death of the Outsider.
Yeah, I put the head for a souvenir of the first version.
Yes. You can see that head in some of the display cases too, I think.
Yeah.
So that the trailer, which sort of first introduced the Clockwork Mansion, how sort of far along was the in-game version of it when the sort of pre-rendered trailer was being made?
David, you probably remember more because I know you worked on a lot of the mock-ups that they used, but I'm gonna say we were not very far along at all, from what I remember.
No. We give some ideas of to Blur Studio, and we explain the intentions of the moving parts and the system of the transformations. And they imagine what they've done on this. So we've got a small exchange with the Blur Studio. We gave our first intentions, our first idea, and they do what they do. And the trailer gave us some new ideas. So we went like this.
Tell me about the assessment chamber. What was the sort of design around this one?
I am going to be able to talk about this a lot when we're going through my old prototype videos for this, because what was to be the assessment chamber was originally like half of the entire map. It was originally enormous, and the original concept was that it was kind of out there. Jindash was not just testing their like basic locomotion and response to sight and sound, but he was like trying to see if he had invented ethics. So he would put the Clockwork Soldiers in all these ethical situations where you had to like have an arbitrary goal, and the easy way to achieve the goal involved somebody dying, and the of course the difficult solution like would allow despair. This was very on the nose for the game we were making. It was like, okay, player, you get to have a little bit of control over your chaos level now. Let's see if you can manage to solve these to solve these ethical challenges designed for robots. But you had to go through this whole very long obstacle course to finally reach Sokolov. And in the end, like so many things, there's just, you can only do so much with the scope you have and the time you have. So at one point, still very early, I think we hadn't yet moved out of Unreal prototypes by the time the decision was made to say we need like the most conservative version of this that still achieves the original goal, which is that Sokolov is not in a dungeon. He's not in a cell. Like where would Jindash put Sokolov in his house? Because he doesn't have a jail cell. So where would he go? Well, he puts him in we called it the rat maze, the new version. He just puts him in this like little obstacle course for the Clockwork Soldier, and that's where we wound up.
Do you have like an intended order for the level? Because you can go kill or deal with Jindosh first, or you can go get Sokolov first. Do you have like what you think that the player should be done, or do you not mind at all?
No, for 99.9, how many other nines you need, the layout is designed so that what you do first is purely based on what you want to do first, or just like where your curiosity takes you. For speedrunners, definitely Jindosh first, Sokolov second. That's the 0.0001%, and that was that's just logical for speedrunning because you need to take Sokolov to the exit. Therefore, you're going to do Sokolov last. So there were a lot of decisions built around how our speedrunners going to interact with this map. And it occurred to me quite early that, well, like what I just explained, what's the natural order there? So I never let that override a decision that was going to be better for the majority of players, but it was always just in the back of my head. Like what would a speedrunner do here, and how can I make sure that I'm not making decisions that's just going to make a really awkward situation? Because I wanted to see amazing speedruns, and I have gotten many amazing speedruns.
And so I imagine, so unfortunately, because I was messing around, I missed a brilliant bit, I think, is that a lot of players are going to sort of come around that elevator bit. They come and get Sokolov and they go back to the elevator, and now there's enemies coming down it. How did that idea come about to block the player's sort of obvious path back?
That's something that came in rather late. And it arrived at the same time as there's two changes that happen as you progress. If you do Sokolov first, so the guards appear from the elevator, and the clockworks will all move into the atrium area. Not all of them, but there's other clockwork soldiers that are stowed away in the walls, and those will have emerged in the atrium. So we wanted the player's experience to be a bit different if you did go after Sokolov first, because Jindosh is still like alive and observing and reacting, and that's a bit of the Shodan-ness coming into play here. So Jindosh is aware of what you've done, so he's going to try to stop you. So the guards come in and the extra clockworks come in. It makes the level feel a bit more reactive.
So I'm going to go over here and stash. Oh god, this was not how I planned for this bit to go. I wanted to be a bit more stealthy with this, but never mind. That's the joy of Dishonored, is you can always just
no matter what happens, you can always improvise.
Exactly, yeah. I was just curious about like you guys, how you typically play Dishonored as fans when you get the chance to play it yourself. Are you more stealthy players or more chaotic players?
Well, I've played the game about 1,000,000 times by release, and usually when I'm playing as a developer, I'm being pretty messy, like purposefully being messy. I'm not trying to emulate the I'm not trying to emulate myself while I'm testing, because when I'm playing, I am going for the like no kills, no detections, save scumming, everything perfect, 100% at everything route through the map. So it's yeah, I experience both.
What about you, David?
Yeah, I want to play sneaky as possible, but it finished oftenly chaotic way.
So when you make a mistake, you don't load your save, you just go with it. Yeah, that's actually how we prefer players to play, is to just embrace the mistakes and enjoy the systems. But of course, maybe I'm a bit of a hypocrite. That's not the way I play.
It's funny.
I want to be sneaky but kill a lot of people. So,
what could you tell me about these characters? They're quite out of place, being the only threats, but other than the sort of maid staff. But yeah, what's the sort of intention with these characters?
That was part of the world building, like to give to help explain why any of this exists. This is an example of two buyers. So they're here because they're interested in buying some Clockwork Soldiers. So they Jindosh welcomed them in, just like he had welcomed you in. They're escorted into this room, but then Emily arrives and Jindosh just completely forgets about them. So now they're just in this room waiting, and they don't know what's going on. They don't know what's happening. It's just a little bit of storytelling to make this place feel like stuff is happening even when the player isn't there. All of this has a purpose. Life is continuing.
So another thing that people love about Dishonored is the sort of environmental storytelling. So we've got like a character here who has died inside the walls. Mm-hmm. What's the sort of collaboration with narrative, the narrative team in terms of that? Is that more of a level design is going to decide where these little moments go? It's narrative, or a bit of both?
It can come from any direction. Sometimes the idea will come from level art first. Mm-hmm. And then it'll be looked at by narrative. Sometimes it'll come from me first, from level design, or narrative could say, "Hey, we have this note. We want to put something in the map to support it, like create a little situation." I think that was the case here. Like this note was written, so the question then became, can we build a location for this event to happen, so that when you stumble upon the note, it's not hidden in a drawer somewhere, it's actually at the place where this character perished. So I think that little moment existed in various places around the map until it finally settled on this final resting place. So I don't have a super clear memory of this one. I mean, it was like 7 years ago. But I think in this case, the note came first, but very often the opposite will be true, where maybe David set up something very, very specific, and a narrative designer will see it and want to go deeper on it, figure out exactly what happened here, help the play. It's an opportunity to grow the world a little bit.
This room is pretty stunning. Do you remember sort of anything about making this one? Especially so is it the waterfall is powering these turbines? Is that kind of powering the Clockwork Mansion?
Yeah. I think, David, is this from your design, or was this Glenn?
Yeah, it was an idea from Glenn.
Glenn Martin.
Yeah, he was a level artist too. Mm-hmm. He started the Admire mission. And yes, when we talk together, we can ask something iconic of this big room. So we talk together, and he had this idea. Mm. So he had the idea of the waterfall, and I put the machine under to produce some energy.
And for a long time, there was no glass, and we eventually had to put the glass up because it was going to be too complicated and too expensive in terms of work hours to make the player be able to interact with the water in a convincing way. So we just had to concede and say, well, it's surrounded by glass. We can't make this credible. And unfortunately, that's just the way it goes sometimes.
Do you remember any discussions about sort of where the inspiration came from for the style of the house and the furniture and things like that?
We have a memory constraint for the house, and we have to reuse a lot of the more as possible of already existing walls and interior architecture, because we got some a budget of new or specific pieces, and all our specific pieces are in the mechanism, because everything is new. We don't have nothing in reusable in the other maps. So we have all our specific budget for the moving parts, and so I take all the walls or window or any stuff from the other maps.
When you say budget, you mean both in terms of like the memory and the hardware, but also in terms of work hours.
Yeah, right? And asset and props. Yes.
So Jindosh's bedroom is one of the more interesting parts of the level. It's just got so much going on and so many different, well, I'm standing on a thing there, so many different mechanisms. I just spotted something that went up there. Can you talk a bit about how, the thoughts behind creating his personal quarters?
The carousel was probably the idea that is the oldest and isn't like it arrived in the map the purest from its original idea. Like from my earliest paper maps, I knew I wanted his personal space to have it wasn't going to be as extravagant as the atrium, but it was built around this idea of it's 3 rooms. There's a rotating part in the center. Each room has 2 configurations. So you wind up with this very complex space of like multi-usage rooms. And what exactly each room was changed a lot. That was more driven by David to see what we can actually achieve with the budgets we just talked about. But the plan of, for example, there was going to be the bedroom, and then he can roll out of bed, pull the lever, wait 3 seconds, turn around, and his bathtub would be right there. that was the that was like the seed that grew into this. That was my starting point. Or maybe he wanted to instead pull the lever but stay he wanted to roll back into bed. So now he has the sunrise coming up. So his bed is facing the windows. So it all really revolved around what are the whims of this person, and what would he find comfortable or comforting in the place where it's not about showing off to people what his mechanisms can do. It's all about his convenience and his comfort.
I know that you can go out through the maintenance door there. There's so many different routes. How do you balance having so many different ways the player can do things, but not making it so it's too easy that they could just get to Jindosh immediately? Like, how do you make sure that there's enough challenge there, but also enough routes?
Well, on the contrary, we do make it so that the player can get to Jindosh immediately. Like being able to kill him while he's still on the bridge, walking back. So you finish the conversation with him at the door, and then you go around the back, and you can arrive at that lever, but while he's still standing on the bridge, and you can pull it to make him fall. We absolutely did not try to make it impede the player's progress. All the circulation is really built around the the balance to achieve is what feels natural for the layout of this building, as if it was a real place, but also what can the player hold in their head as a map. And a rule of thumb there is never have more than 3 ways in and out of a room, but that's excluding special ways. So just the player enters a room through a doorway. There's a maximum of 2 other doorways leading out, but there might be a rat tunnel, or there could be a loose panel in the ceiling. There could always be extra ways, but just in terms of getting a map in your head of what the layout of this building is, like as soon as you have 3 doors, you enter and then now there's 3 paths to go, it becomes much more difficult to just get a sense of the layout. So just following the rule of 3 doors are your maximum, you can do a lot and still keep it understandable. But the other thing we did with the layout, as far as like keeping it approachable, like making sure that the player could always keep track of where they were, is the building is divided very cleanly into 4 sections, 5 sections if you count the assessment chamber area. So they're connected by hallways, fairly long hallways, so you always feel like you're moving from one zone to another. Sometimes, there's that front part with the atrium and the gallery. There's the second part is with the arc pylon or the piano, the dining room, the lounge there with the guests. There's the private area, and then there's the lab, and then there's the assessment chamber. And each of those areas have very strong thresholds disconnecting them. So you know when you're moving from one zone to the next. So now you can kind of like flush your RAM, like let go of the thing you were trying to memorize the last year, because now you're somewhere new and you can start processing new information again without having to remember everything that was behind you. We call that the door effect. That's a pretty big design just guideline in level design. Is every time the player goes through a door, as like ideally you can let them forget about what was behind them and let them process what's in front of them. And every time you want to make that, like you need for that to happen, you just add a stronger and stronger threshold. Like the basic one is like an airlock. So it's not a single door, it's a door, a hallway, and a second door. That makes a very strong break to let them let go of what was behind, let them process what's ahead. And we do that constantly in this map.
How is that made more challenging with the whole movement of the level?
It made it easier because it gave us more space in each zone to build out. So because each of the areas are separated with these hallways, now we are less constrained with space. So we can create the behind the scenes corridors. We can create all of this room for the mechanisms to fold into it. The 2 ideas work perfectly with each other.
Excellent. So every Dishonored level has to have both a lethal way to kill your target and a non-lethal way. What sort of how did you come to this decision to have it be a way to sort of electroshock Jindosh?
I wanted a third way. I really wanted you to be able to just leave with Sokolov and leave Jindosh alone. I felt like that was a choice that made sense for just the player's motivation and even Emily's motivation. And it reflected what I had done. The previous map that I worked on in Dishonored 1 was a flooded district. And I felt like the decision to just, you're not deciding to not engage with the content. The content is in front of you and you're making the choice to not do the thing. That's as much of a choice as doing the thing. So you decide to not confront doubt. You can leave. And I wanted to do something similar here, to have like this very dark and brutal solution of using the electroshock machine, which again, that came from creative direction. That wasn't something that I came up with. The request was the solution to Jindosh is to use this electroshock treatment to do something to his mind, to make him no longer able to invent things. So I figured out what the puzzle was for it, like how you achieved it with the different power levels of the machine. But the goal of doing like what the non-lethal was given to me.
Mm.
But the reason why we couldn't do the third option of leaving him alone was every time you have a decision like that, there's budgets everywhere. So in this case, it was a voice acting budget, and all of the different outcomes have to be supported later on in the game. And as soon as we then had to branch into 3, the cost of recording for each of those different outcomes, including like the end game where you see the fates of all the different characters, it was going to have to branch again there. And in that case, it wasn't just a voice acting budget, it was now an art budget, because they would have had to set up a different vignette for that. So like between the outsider commenting on what you've done, or recordings at the Duke's Palace of Jindosh's fate, it was decided that no, we have to stick to 2. You either kill him or you use the electroshock.
Another thing that we see a lot of times in Decide levels is that not only do you have to sneak into an area, but you often have to also sneak back out again. Yeah. What sort of considerations did you have to make for that with the plot mentioned, if any?
I really wanted there to be a way for you to get Sokolov out without exiting yourself. That's something that I tried to do, because I didn't think it was fun to have to go all the way back out of the map carrying him and keeping him alive. Because while you're carrying him, if you're attacked, he can die too. So suddenly you're in a force fail situation, or an instant fail situation. You take 1 piece of damage, it hit his body too, and now it's a game over because Sokolov died. So I created all of these different routes and methods. At one point, I imagined like there was a Clockwork Soldier delivery mechanism, and it was basically like a pneumatic tube that you could Jindosh would load the Clockwork Soldiers in and would shoot them down this gigantic pipe into the city, and you could put Sokolov into one of those and just shoot him out so he would be safe and you weren't carrying him all the way to the exit. But again, like David was saying earlier, we had so many budget constraints on this map, and that was just way out of scope for what we were doing. So in the end, the solution was just to make Sokolov really resistant to damage, so you wouldn't have that frustrating departure. But yeah, it was really just, there was no design for getting Sokolov out other than you're now going back through the spaces that you used to enter, and you can either retrace your steps or you can try to find a new way, because there's so many different ways through. So if you try to find a new way, you might, like, the reason why you might want to do that is maybe before you were very stealthy and there's still enemies throughout that entire area. So now you know, well, I'm familiar with that space, but I know it's dangerous. And now because I'm carrying Sokolov, I'm going more slowly, so I'm at a disadvantage. Let me try to find another route. And that's when we also had the possibility that Jindosh is still alive. So the Clockwork Soldiers might be, like you're about to see, there will be Clockwork Soldiers in the atrium now. There was once 1, and now there should be 3. But yeah, that's basically it.
I often find when I'm playing Dishonored is that I'm really sneaky on the way in, and then I get to my target and I have to get back out again, and I start to sort of lose a bit of patience, and I start running out, and it gets a bit hectic, and I'm just sort of like blasting my way out. But I mean, that's part of the fun.
That is super valid.
Yeah. So there's now a lot of Clockwork Soldiers. So I'm just going to quickly. Oh my gosh!
Whoops! Oh no!
I don't want to get Sokolov like stuck. But an interesting thing with this level is that it's quite difficult to like get squished in the mechanisms. How do you sort of make sure that wasn't too easy to happen?
We just had to put spaces everywhere. We put more than enough room in all all the different spots where you could potentially get stuck, and we just tested it over and over. We, I'd never wanted the player to fail just because they tried something and the game says, no, sorry, that's not the way the game works. You lose. It always should feel like a fair what's the word I'm looking for? It's a bit unrelated to your question, but a big example of this is initially the arc pylon that you could turn upside down. When it was upside down, it was still active. So if you flipped it over, you were just moving the problem. You would still have to deal with it when you're down below. But no one understood that. And every time the player would go down below, the arc pylon would kill them. And they were just really mad. They felt like the game just killed them for no reason. They didn't know why they died. They didn't know what caused it. And in the end, I just had to concede to say, like, this isn't intuitive. The player doesn't feel like this is a fair challenge. So when the arc pylon's upside down, it's turned off.
Because part of the thing with games from Arkane and sort of other immersive sims is that there are these ironclad rules that the game are built on. But I suppose there are moments where you have to kind of break those rules if they're not in the sort of service of the player.
Yes, or we're just running into a technical constraint that we can't surmount. For example, there was a little ellipses there. When you exit the map with Sokolov, you're teleported directly into the rail car. And that was because we had no way to start the player off in a map still carrying a body. So in the end, we just had to say, okay, the player doesn't get to choose what happens here. We teleport them directly to the rail car. Sokolov is already in place. As it would just be too big of a, like, it would require too many hours of work from a programmer to solve this when an animation would fix it. So we more often like break our own rules just because our back is up against a wall technically.
Cool. Right. I have escaped the Clockwork Mansion. I didn't do too bad. I got spotted quite a few times. But I mean, the interesting thing is there's a bunch of places I never even saw. I didn't go into there's like a sort of room to the right of the atrium. I think the waiting room it's called. There's some other rooms I never even went in, but I managed to sort of do it. So I mean, is that anything
from the roof?
Yeah, is that anything you sort of think about in terms of you're going to be putting in work that the players are never even going to see? If that's something that you sort of worry about, or is it just part of the deal?
Well, this is the game where you can skip an entire level if you if you do a puzzle. So I would say we're very firmly in the camp of let the player find their own way through the map. And if that means missing half the content, then that's how they chose to engage with the content. We're not going to arbitrarily stop them. Just like you get to decide when your experience is over in this case.